Hello everyone and welcome to this, another Thomas and Friends related video. It's been a very long time and I will be returning to the top 5 of Series 2. Don't you worry about it. But for now, I thought I'd do something a little bit different, something I haven't actually done before on the channel. I will be showing my entire Railway Series book collection. I have the entire Railway Series book collection from the Reverend W. Awdry and Christopher Awdry. Kind of. You'll see as the video progresses what I mean. But here we are, we have the books here. There we are, the Railway Series, the classic Reverend W. Awdry, Christopher Awdry books that I dropped. So I'm going to be showcasing these books for you and talking a little bit about them and also giving you my views on the books themselves individually. So please enjoy this video, and don't forget, if you haven't already, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, tap the bell for more notifications, and of course comment on the video itself and all the other videos on the channel if you're interested, of course. And don't forget to check out all the links down in the description below, my social media, and of course my Patreon page. Become a Patreon, be a hat twin, come on! So here we go with the video, let's get started. And here we are with the Railway Series collection, kicking off with where it all began. Anyone who's a fan of the Thomas and Friends series or the Railway Series books will be very familiar with the backstory of this 1945 release. Of course, the Reverend W. Awdry created the story Edward's Day Out for his young son Christopher Awdry, who was ill in bed. The little blue engine in question, of course, Edward, became a catalyst for what would become a huge franchise in both the Railway Series books that became remarkably popular almost overnight and has now become an institution in children's entertainment. And it all started with this book, The Three Railway Engines. And as you can see, a beautiful hardback released by Egmont. It is nice and sturdy, and the illustrations are absolutely stunning. As you can see here, this is obviously from Edward and Gordon. It is absolutely beautiful. The pages are nice and crisp. The artwork is beautifully restored, and it's just an absolute joy to have all of these books in my possession. And so this was the very first book from 1945 that kicked it all off, The Three Railway Engines. And now we have probably the most iconic release in the Railway Series franchise from 1946. It is the Little Blue Engine, the #1 engine, Thomas the Tank Engine. And this is probably the most popular book of the Railway Series. And of course, this iconic little blue steam locomotive is the reason for the series becoming such a big hit. And it really is an absolutely beautiful book. Just look at the artwork there, absolutely stunning. So let's move on to the third volume. And here is book number 3, James the Red Engine, which the Reverend W. Awdry has expressed himself that he was not a massive fan of this book. It was very much a rushed release, and the concept of the stories really are very much like Thomas. It's a story of redemption. We all know the story of James the Red Engine. Again, absolutely beautifully presented. There we go, just giving a quick flick through. Just look at the detailing on those pages. So that is James the Red Engine. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? And here we are with number 4, Tank Engine Thomas. Again, the popularity of the Little Blue Engine was such that Wilbur Awdry was compelled to release another splendid volume of this wonderful little blue tank engine. Absolutely beautiful. Thomas, Terence and the Snow. The animations are something of an absolute spectacle. And let's move on now to the next one, shall we? I think we shall. And here we are with number 5, Troublesome Engines, which was released in 1950. Another fantastic volume. This is one of my favourite of the early volumes, of the first 10 books, I would say. Look at this. There we go. There we are. Look at that. It's absolutely stunning, isn't it? There we go. Absolutely beautiful book. Absolutely fantastic. Love every story in this one. Really good volume, and another absolute classic from the Reverend W. Awdry. He really was prolific. And here we have number 6, Henry the Green Engine from 1951, a unique book in itself, as this was the first and only Railway Series book to feature 5 stories. Percy in the Trousers is a short story that's thrown in the middle for some unknown reason, but it is a fantastic volume, and it's probably my favourite of the first 10 to 12 books. And it's a great story arc as well, how we start off with Henry as a very sick engine who really doesn't feel like he's got much left in him, as you can see in the image at the start. But we go along this fantastic journey through coal, all the way to the classic story, The Flying Kipper, all the way to the very end, where quite a contrast in Henry's characteristics from where he began this story. It's an absolutely fantastic story arc, and one of the strongest for me. I absolutely adore this book. Yes, Henry the Green Engine, one of my absolute favourites. And now we continue with number 7, Toby the Tram Engine. Not one of my all-time favourite characters, and certainly not one of my favourite Railway Series books, but I know that Christopher Awdry was a huge fan of Toby the Tram Engine, and this is a fantastic book, fantastic volume in the collection, and it's got some absolutely classic stories, of course. There is really no Railway Series book from the Reverend's era that I dislike or do not think is anything less than brilliant, and of course this is my favourite story in the book, Dirty Objects. Absolutely wonderful, great book, great volume, not much else to say on it. Let's move on. And along with Troublesome Engines and Henry the Green Engine, Gordon the Big Engine is probably again one of my favourite volumes from the series. It's got some of my absolute favourite stories with Gordon in here, and a very striking pink. And there's Thomas and Gordon, of course, working together. You help me and I'll help you. Absolutely brilliant. There we go, Off the Rails. Absolutely wonderful. We've got Down the Mine as well. It is just so many classic stories. It's an absolutely wonderful volume. So this is, of course, Gordon the Big Engine. And here we have Book 9, Edward the Blue Engine. Now, if you are familiar with the narrations that accompanied these books, essentially audio books for the time, you may have come across Willie Rushton, who narrated from this volume onwards up until Tramway Engines, which was the last release, of course, of the Reverend W. Awdry's era. And I've got to say that Willie Rushton is absolutely fantastic. Not only do I think Willie Rushton is the best narrator of the Railway series, I also think he's one of the best Thomas-related narrators of all time. I really love his storytelling and his style. He knows where the humour is within the books. He understands the characters probably better than anyone else did. His characterizations are absolutely brilliant, and he really makes you feel immersed in this world of the island of Sodor. So Edward the Blue Engine, a great volume, really enjoyed this one. It's got some great stories in it, like Old Iron and Bertie's Chase, and Cows even is a good one as well. Yeah, highly recommend this book in the series. And here we continue with number 10, The Four Little Engines, the introduction of the narrow gauge engines, Peter Sam, Skarloey, Rheneas, and of course Sir Handel. So The Four Little Engines is a fantastic little book, so entertaining. You get a fantastic story arc again, particularly with Skarloey, and understanding what a spectacularly wise and old and trusted engine he is. It's just a fantastic little book, fantastic little stories, and it's a lot of fun, and one of my favourites of the narrow gauge engines as well. It really is a brilliant little book. Of course, this begins a much longer story arc, which gets concluded towards the end of the Reverend's era. And it really is a brilliant finale to this. This is a fantastic little book, and although that they did not appear in Series 2, as they probably should have done if they were doing the stories on television in chronological order, the budget was not there at the time, but they did revisit the majority of these stories for Series 4, which of course is a beautiful series in itself. So this is The Four Little Engines, number 10. We come to number 11, Percy the Small Engine, which is another great little book, one of my favourites again from the first 12 books. Yeah, I love Percy, and I love the stories that are included in this book and the escapades that ensue with him. Yeah, it's a great book. Percy and the Signal, one of my favourites. Duck Takes Charge, again, is another absolute classic, really, really good. Percy and Harold, again, another classic, and one of my favourites again, which originally didn't air with Series 2, it came out for Series 3, and that is Percy's Promise, another fantastic story, probably my favourite in this actual book. Great stories. Yeah, Percy the Small Engine, absolutely brilliant little book. And now we have the 1957 release, 8 Famous Engines, number 12. And of course, this features Percy Takes the Plunge, probably my favourite story from the TV series, Series 2, and one of my favourites from this volume as well. Absolutely fantastic. Gordon Goes Foreign, which was a story that was going to be released for Series 3, but the production of that never actually happened. So many good stories in here. Doubleheader, which is another great little story as well. There's so many good stories in this book as well. It's a really, really top-notch one. And here we have number 13, one of the most iconic and best loved books, Duck and the Diesel Engine. It's a great book, and it, of course, goes into the story of the first diesel to arrive on the island of Sodor. And also, this was when diesels were just coming in as the new big thing, threatening steam engines and their livelihoods forever. And it's a fantastic journey, and it's a fantastic story arc, and Duck and Diesel are just brilliant in this collection of stories. It really is an absolutely fantastic read, and there's an iconic image right there if ever you wanted to see one. Yeah, Duck and the Diesel Engine, of course, is a classic, really great book, and one of my favourites as well. And here we come now to number 14. We're over halfway through Wilbert's run, and this is another narrow gauge engine book, The Little Old Engine. Great collection of stories such as Trucks, littered with absolutely classic stories. Just look at this. Introduction of Rusty and Duncan as well. It's just beautiful. Great little stories, and it's an absolute joy. Yeah, it's a great book. Nothing more really to say about it. It's not one of my absolute favourites, but it's definitely a fantastic read. The Twin Engines now, number 15, and this is a strange release, mostly because of the backstory to it when it comes to the television series. There is a story in here called The Special Coach, which I did do a recreation of on my channel. If you want to check it out, it is worth a watch. So, of course, this is the story of Donald and Douglas and their arrival on the Fat Controllers Railway, and it's got some brilliant stories in here. Of course, Hello Twins, The Deputation, Brake Van, and like I said, the unusual story, The Missing Coach, which is a confusing story even in the illustrated books. How they were going to make this for television, I can understand why they pulled it. It is complicated, and simplifying it would have been almost completely taken away the essence of the story. But overall, this is a great little book, and of course Donald and Douglas are fantastic characters. So yeah, number 15, The Twin Engines. And now we have number 16, Branch Line Engines, which continues on from the Donald and Douglas story arc as they appear in the very first story, which is, of course, Thomas Comes to Breakfast. Another very iconic image right there of Thomas literally coming to breakfast. And there we go, there's Donald and Douglas coming to rescue Thomas. And then, of course, the introduction of Daisy. We have Percy's Predicament, as well as Bullseyes, which didn't release in Series 2, it came later in Series 4. But yeah, there we go with Percy's Predicament. Another fantastic volume, a great little collection of stories. Not more to say on it, really. It is Branch Line Engines. And now we have number 17, Gallant Old Engine, which personally is my second favourite of the narrow gauge engine books. It features stories like Special Funnel, Steamroller, which of course introduces George the Steamroller. There's some really classic stories in here from, there we go, classic image there. This is produced for Series 4. Passengers of Polish, another very good one. It's a really good book, and yeah, for the narrow gauge engines, this is one of the absolute best. Yeah, it's a great little story. Maybe not my second favourite, because although I did say that Four Little Engines is one of my favourites, it's not my actual favourite. So I would put this maybe second or third, actually. Probably third. It's a really good book, though. Gallant Old Engine. Number 17. And here we are with number 18, Stepney the Bluebell Engine. Another very good volume. I actually will say that I do really like the Series 4 adaptations, but in the books, I think they're good, but it's, again, not one of my strongest volumes, I would say. It's not one that I often will come and revisit, but Train Stops Play is a good story, really do enjoy that one. And Bowled Out is a very good one as well. But for me, the book is not one of my strongest. Stepney's definitely not one of my all-time favourite characters, so maybe that's a contributing factor. But I do really like the episodes in Series 4 of the TV series, but as a book, it, for me, is not one of the strongest Wilbert stories. Now we really do have a good one here. This is one of my favourites as well, and I think this is criminally underrated. This is not really spoken about very much. Coldy and the Mountain Engines that he works with, they have some great little stories. A lot of these have been made into reconstructions with models and animation and everything on YouTube, and I can see why. I think this would have been a really good spin-off in the Thomas and Friends series when they were doing the CGI original series. Once Brenner took over, I said on one of my videos that I really think that they should have made a feature-length episode of this. I think it would have been fantastic. A lot of excitement, a lot of fantastic moments. I think Mountain Engines is a really, really good book, and it's got fantastic stories in it. Yeah, really good. Highly recommend it. That's number 19. Cool, we're getting through them, aren't we? Now, this is a very interesting book. This is, of course, number 20, Very Old Engines. Again, another book sort of going into more the history of the narrow gauge engines, particularly Skarloey and Rheneas, with stories like Crosspatch, etc. Now, there's one particular story at the end here called Duck and Jukes, which sort of alludes to a story that comes out later on, and it kind of brings the narrow gauge story arc full to its conclusion. And it's very interesting how, yeah, we have story arcs in most of these books, but the narrow gauge story arc doesn't just span over a couple of books. This is a much longer, drawn-out storyline, which sort of gets celebrated at the end of Wilbert's reign. And Very Old Engines, particularly Ducks and Jukes, is a very interesting piece of that puzzle. So yes, very highly recommended, especially if you read just the narrow gauge engines books one after the other, and this is a very important link in the chain to the overall story arc of the Very Old narrow gauge engines. Very, very good book. Recommend this one very much. And none of these stories actually ever appeared in the TV series, sadly. Would have been nice to have seen some of those. But yeah, Very Old Engines, number 20. Now we have number 21, Mainline Engines, and this, of course, features for the first time the two naughty twins, Bill and Ben, and of course Boko as well. It's a really, really good little volume as well. Some classic stories in there, of course. Yeah, we have Buzz Buzz as well, which features in Series 3, unlike most of the other stories which featured in Series 2. Yeah, it's a good little book, good stories in here. And one of them in particular is particularly fantastic, which is this one, Edward's Exploit. Unfortunately, the TV series did not do it justice in the same way it does in the book. If you look at the detail of Edward's bodywork after his accident, trying to get the train home in thunderous rain and gale and winds, it really doesn't do it justice in the TV series, although the TV series episode, don't get me wrong, is fantastic. Yeah, Edward's Exploit is definitely the highlight in this book, and it's beautifully told, and listen to Willie Rushton's narration of it as well. It is fantastic. A gem in this book, but overall a good book, not one of the absolute best overall for me. And that is number 21, Mainline Engines. Now, until a few years ago in the CGI Brenner era, we had a load of characters that had never featured in the television series. The Mountain Engines are amongst some of them which have never featured, and until the Brenner era, neither did Mike, Rex and Bert, the Small Railway Engines, number 22, in case you hadn't noticed. And it's basically introducing them to the small railway and the small controller, and it's got some fantastic stories which were adapted for Series 20, and it's brilliant. They are brilliant little stories. They're such lively characters, and of course there we go, the Reverend W. Awdry there, and his, of course, companion and friend in real life. It's brilliant. It's a great little book with great little stories, and I would highly recommend this. This is one of the better ones from the latter half of the Reverend W. Awdry's era for me. I really like Small Railway Engines. It's a great little volume. And now we come to a bit of a beast of a book. This is Enterprising Engines number 23. This is, for me, probably my favourite. I would probably say this is my favourite, along with Henry the Green Engine, out of all of the Wilbur Awdry books. I think this is absolutely jam-packed with absolutely superb stories. I will run through them because I do think they're worth mentioning, because some of these did not ever feature in the TV series. We have Tenders for Henry, which was obviously a story we did see in Series 3. Super Rescue, which is an absolutely fantastic story where the diesels break down and Henry ends up coming to the rescue, even though he himself, quote, was a failed engine. Absolutely brilliant. It highlights how tremendously hard Henry works and how his bravery can overcome any obstacle, and kind of redeems himself after Tenders for Henry, to be honest, where he was a little bit of a joke. And of course we have the story Escape, which is an iconic Oliver introduction episode, and he would lead on to another book, Little Westerns, which is another great story. Yeah, I think that this is, for me, in terms of actual storytelling, this is probably the most rewarding and most impressive of the books. So along with probably Henry the Green Engine, Enterprising Engines is probably my favourite Wilbur book. It's absolutely brilliant. From 1968, number 23. We are nearly at the very end of Wilbert's reign as the writer for the Railway series. What a great few last volumes we have. Enterprising Engines. We come to number 24, Oliver the Western Engine. Following on from Enterprising Engines, which introduced Oliver, we have, that crack. We have some more fantastic little stories featuring Oliver. Donald's Duck, which is one from Series 3, which I really enjoyed. Great little stories. Resource and Sagacity, which essentially is Oliver Owns Up in Series 3. There we go, there's an iconic image. And then Toad Stands By is another one that I absolutely love. I think that's a brilliant one. And Bulgy as well from Series 3. So yeah, there's some really, really good stories in this book. Yeah, another very strong release towards the end of Wilbert's reign. And now we have an absolute classic, another one of my absolute favourite books, probably my top 3 or 4, this one. And this is where the narrow gauge railway story arc comes to its conclusion. Duke the Lost Engine, which originally was meant to be Wilbert's last book, but he was pushed into making more. He made just the one more after this, and this one is brilliant. This one is probably, on reflection, my favourite of the narrow gauge books. It, of course, reflects back on the story from very old engines. This Duke that I believe the engines were confused about. They were expecting Duke, which never came. The Duke that they saw was a man. And then we then get introduced to the Duke that Peter Sam and Sir Handel were on about, and we start with Grandpuff. And then of course it is Peter Sam and Sir Handel when they were Stuart and Falcon, and they were in green and blue livery rather than the red livery that they have throughout the entirety of the series up until this point, which of course is a flashback journey, and it brings the narrow gauge engine railway full circle, and it's just absolutely beautiful. It is beautifully done. It was very, very nicely done in the TV series in Series 4, but because of it being the opening 4 episodes of the series, it doesn't quite have the same impact as it does in the Railway series. So overall, the book, I think, overall captures it better. But Duke the Lost Engine, an absolutely fantastic penultimate book from the Reverend W. Awdry, and one of his finest. And now we come to the Reverend W. Awdry's last book. It is number 26. Here we have Tramway Engines, and of course we can see it introduces Mavis the diesel engine, as we can see from likes of Bear, Boko, Daisy, Diesel and Mavis. Diesels were starting to become a big part of railway industries and were starting to become part of the fabric of the railway series as well. And there's some great stories in here. Toby's Tightrope, for example, Ghost Train, Mavis. It's a great little volume. It's not the strong ending to the series like the Duke of the Lost Engine book, but it is full of great little stories, and it's always nice to have carried on with the Reverend, because he just knew how to write classic railway stories. Kids all over the world would have been very excited about it, and it's a very good little book, and it's got some very good little stories. Tramway Engines, and the finale to the wonderful Reverend Wilbert Awdry, who is, of course, someone who I will be forever grateful for, because without him, my favourite television series and one of my favourite interests would never have occurred if it wasn't for his original fantastic railway series books. And that is, in conclusion, all of the Reverend W. Awdry's books, all 26 volumes. They are very easy to find in collection boxes or individually. I suggest, if you haven't picked them up, definitely pick them up. If you are a fan of the series, you will love the books. And if you've loved the books, I would go out and purchase these again in these fantastic hardback press releases. They are absolutely wonderful, full of colour, full of vibrant text, and it's just a joy to revisit these books. It really is. I can't recommend these books highly enough. Now we move on to the Christopher Awdry era. Now these were much harder to obtain in individual books, and they were quite a bit more expensive. So some of them I came by chance, some of them I've bought online, and some of them were a pretty penny, shall we say. And we start off with number 27, Really Useful Engines. And this is one of the earlier editions, hence why it is not quite as well presented as Reverend W. Awdry editions. But yeah, we have some good little stories. I've never been very keen on the Christopher Awdry era animations. I think they're quite ugly. We've got some good little stories in this one, like Mind That Bike and Fish, which did feature in Series 4 as well, and Triple Header, which is a great little story as well. It's a very good little book. Not one of my absolute favourites from Christopher's era, and not one of my favourite Railway Series books at all, but it's good. It's good. It's nothing spectacular, but it's worth picking up if you can. And now we move on to James and the Diesel Engines, number 28, which came out in 1984. This is okay. There's one story in here I do particularly enjoy, which I think is Crossed Lines. Old Stuck Up is an okay story. Nothing overly exciting. Crossed Lines is probably my favourite. It's probably the one I can imagine seeing in the TV series more than any of the others. But yeah, it's good. It's, again, nothing special. The animations are not my favourite, but they are well presented in these books. They do look rather nice. Deep Freeze is not a bad story either. So yeah, there's some good little stories, but like Really Useful Engines, there's nothing spectacular in here. It's a good little book. And now we continue with Great Little Engines, number 29. This has narrow gauge engines, and unfortunately, Christopher Awdry, he didn't remain too faithful to the narrow gauge engines. He's not the greatest at writing narrow gauge stories. There's some good ones in here, probably one of the better narrow gauge story books, but that he did at least. But it's nothing too spectacular. The last story is based on an actual event that happened up in Wales on the narrow gauge railway, but other than that, nothing significantly impressive about this book. It's number 29, and it's Great Little Engines. Go pick it up if you can find it. So number 30, and this is a book that I think Christopher Awdry was sort of pushed into producing because they wanted more Thomas-focused stories. But out of the Thomas-focused storybooks, I think this is probably one of my better volumes, only because it has a lot of stories in it, like Thomas Percy and the Coal, which was the first episode of Series 2, to feature stories that were in the TV series. So that kind of is why I had a soft spot for this one. The Runaway is one of my favourite stories from Series 2, and it's one of my favourite stories from the book as well. It's a good book, and out of the Thomas Focus stories, I think this is one of the better ones, better late than never. Yeah, the only story that doesn't feature in the TV series that featured in this book is Drip Tank, which I actually think is one of the best stories in this volume, but that's just my opinion. But there we go. That is more about Thomas the Tank Engine. And of course, no one can really complain about more Thomas Focus stories, although Thomas looks very strange in these illustrations, and very bushy eyebrows I've noticed as well. Will you just look at them? And now we have Gordon the High Speed Engine, number 31, which is a brilliant book. High Speed Gordon, which is really, really good. It's really Gordon coming to the twilight years of his life as a steam engine, and it's sad really, because we're seeing that this engine who was once so powerful and so important to the railway, is starting to slowly be taken over by much more functioning diesel engines, etc. But he still proves his point, as the story reads, that he still is just as valuable, is just as brilliant as any other engine, and he really does prove his point. And it's a great story arc. This is one of the story arcs that really feels it goes somewhere and that it has a point, and this one doesn't feel disjointed. This is a great book. Probably, I would say, my favourite of the Christopher Awdry books, I believe. Now we have number 32, Toby, Trucks and Trouble. And like I say, Christopher Awdry, I think one of his favourite characters is Toby. And you can tell by these very lovely little stories. I think he really put a lot of effort into trying to make some really good stories for Toby. And there are some really good ones in here. Bulstrode being one that featured in the classic series, Series 4. Yeah, there's some good little stories in here, and I think it's a very nice little book, very sweet little book, and a nice tribute to Toby and his beginnings. It's a good story again. Not one of the best volumes, but it is enjoyable all the same. And now we come to number 33, which is Thomas and the Twins. This is a good little book as well. It's the first time Thomas actually is featured with the twins, believe it or not. Yeah, it's good again. Got some good stories. I think that it's quite a fun little book. There's not too many stories in the Christopher Awdry era that really stand out as absolutely spectacular, and the story arcs are not always the best focused. But it's still fun. There's still some fun little episodes in there. But yeah, Thomas and the Twins, number 33. Not much to say on it, but it's a good volume. Now we have number 34, Jock the New Engine, and this was one of the more expensive purchases of my Christopher Awdry and Railway Series collection in general, really. This was a pretty penny. This was quite hard to find, and this is in relatively decent condition. A lot of them were in rather shabby condition and not very well looked after, but were still selling for a rather high price. Jock the New Engine, it again focuses on the small engine railway. Yeah, there's some good stories in here. I think it's really nice to revisit the little railway, and yeah, I think this is one of the stronger volumes. Yeah, it's good. It's good, and Jock is a good character, and the way he's slowly introduced and the way his character arc progresses through these stories, I think, is much more wholesome and better fleshed out than some of the other story arc books. So that is Jock the New Engine, number 34. Now, number 35, Thomas and the Great Railway Show. This one was one that was quite hard to obtain, but I ended up getting it for a relatively decent price. And this one is, again, probably one of the better of the Thomas-focused storybooks. Yeah, this is where Thomas travels to York, to the Great Railway Museum, where we see Stephenson's Rocket, who, again, is a character who was adapted for the TV series in the form of Stephen. Some good little stories here on Thomas's journey to York and visiting the museum and everything, being a star attraction, but we won't go into that in too much detail. It alludes, it's the Mallard, which technically is Spencer. But hey ho, good little adventure. Nothing overly spectacular, but I would say it's probably one of the better Thomas Focus storybooks. So yeah, it's a good little volume, another one to add to the collection. Nothing spectacular, but it's still enjoyable. Now we have number 36 here, Thomas Comes Home. Now this one is quite a difficult one to obtain and is relatively pricey, actually, if you find it. But I was very fortunate. This was one of the books that actually I was searching for on Facebook and found an advertisement where someone was selling a load of Thomas books, and a few of these Christopher Awdry books came in the bundle, and I got them all for a very, very good price. I would have paid more for this book alone than I did for the entire set that the person was offering. So yeah, these are basically stories that are focused on what has gone on the island of Sodor while Thomas has been away. This kind of alludes a little bit to Toby's Flood. This story kind of reminds me of that quite a bit. But yeah, there's some good little stories in here. Nothing too spectacular, but they're fun little stories. Before Thomas returns back from York. I do like the purple artwork. It's a nice change. And yeah, it's not bad. Number 36. Thomas Comes Home. Welcome back. And now we have Henry and the Express, number 37. This was, again, one of the more expensive volumes that I picked up. But this is at least presented in the very nice Egmont release, nice hardback. But this was probably one of the more expensive ones that I picked up. But it is beautifully illustrated in here. It does look very, very clean and fine. The details are absolutely beautiful. And the stories themselves are very good. I love Henry Focus books. And I think that the stories that feature in here are definitely worth picking up. Unfortunately, someone decided to do a little bit of a doodle over it. What a doodle. I really enjoy this one. It's a good book. Not for the price. Have a little shop around, see if you can maybe obtain it for a cheaper price than the £20 range. But you can always hear the narrations on it, which are a good substitute, I guess. So that is Henry and the Express, one of my better volumes of the series of Christopher Awdry. And now we have number 38 and the last of the Railway series books to feature an official audiobook narration. And that is Wilbert the Forest Engine, which of course the name Wilbert is akin to that of Christopher Awdry's father, the Reverend Wilbert Awdry. And this is a good little story. I do like the light blue design. This was not one of the harder books to obtain. This one was actually relatively easy. And there we go, we have some good stories, some not very good stories. I think the fact that it didn't really focus on Wilbert very much, like Percy's Porridge is this story, which I think is a bit ridiculous. The best one is this one featuring 16. I think this is probably the best story in the book. But the actual ones that are focused on Wilbert don't really focus on Wilbert very much as a story arc. But hey ho, there we go. This is kind of the problem we have with the Christopher Awdry books, is that they don't always follow the original focus. They sort of get lost in the middle and then conclude at the end. But still, Wilbert the Forest Engine is not a bad little book. And yeah, if you can pick it up, I would. Now we are coming very close to the end, and we have number 39, Thomas and the Fat Controller's Engines. Two of these three books I thankfully was able to pick up as a bundle along with Thomas Comes Home, because these last three that I have for you are particularly expensive if you find them online. So I was very, very lucky to obtain these. Number 39, Thomas and the Fat Controller's Engines. As a storybook, the stories are not overly interesting, if I'm honest. I mean, that's quite an interesting image. But yeah, I can't really remember too much. I mean, when you've got a story called Rabbits, I mean, really, you're not going to be looking for absolutely epic storytelling. Yeah, it's not one of the best books from the Railway series, and it's definitely not Christopher Awdry's finest hour. I think, again, he was being pressured into writing more Thomas-focused stories, even though they're not completely Thomas-focused. But anyway, yeah, Thomas and the Fat Controller's Engines, one of the harder to obtain. Now, the penultimate book in my collection, number 40, New Little Engine. Now, I was very lucky to find this in a bookshop. This was absolutely 100% brand new, and I absolutely 100% got this for the price on the back of the book. I have looked since on eBay and have seen that this book is going for a rather expensive price. I'm not going to say how much, but it's not cheap, these books. And it's because it's one of the last Christopher Audrey releases, therefore I don't think they have really republished it too many times since. So it's kind of hard to obtain these ones. There's only a certain amount of copies. But New Little Engine, it's not a great book. It's definitely one of the weakest from the Christopher Audrey range. So if you are not an avid collector and you are not a completist and you are not too fussed about missing out on 1 or 2 volumes, I would say give this one a skip, especially for the money that it's going for. So that is number 40, New Little Engine. And finally, one of the other more expensive books, which I was lucky enough to find in a bundle of books that I got, as I've said previously, Thomas and Victoria. This is a nice, sturdy, hardback book, and it is full of okay stories. Again, nothing overly exciting, not overly interesting. There's some nice moments in it. Not a great book. Yeah. Not very memorable, if I'm honest. There's not much about this book that I do remember. But again, it's another one of those that if you haven't got the funds to purchase this book, I would personally give it a miss. You're not really missing out on much, but being a completist, I do want to obtain all of the stories, and Thomas and Victoria is the very last one I have. Now, there are, of course, as anybody who is a fan of the Railway series will know, 42 books in the collection. Unfortunately, the very final book, Thomas and His Friends, is a book that when I did see it, it was going for an insane amount of money. And now that it is completely impossible to find a copy of this, unless I'm very fortunate, it's probably the one and only volume that I will not obtain anytime soon. So it is nearly 100% the entire Railway series collection. And to be honest, it's bigger than a lot of collections I've seen. Mostly they've been able to obtain all of the Reverend's books, but not so many of the Christopher Audrey. So this is probably the most complete Reverend and Christopher Audrey series of books that you will find on YouTube at the moment. So I really do apologise that I haven't been able to obtain that book. If you know where I could get a copy, of course, it'd be very, very handy. And if you let me know down in the comments, I'd be very appreciative. But yes, Thomas and Victoria is the last volume that I have in this 41 book of 42 book collection. And there we have it. I have now officially gone through every single one of my Railway series books, and I really do hope you've enjoyed this and that it's been entertaining and insightful and to a certain extent educational. Why not? Yes, so that is my entire Railway series book collection finished. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and I really do hope you enjoyed seeing my entire Railway series book collection. I hope if you haven't already, it gets you starting your own little collection. So once again, please visit the links down in the description below, as well as become a Patreon if you want to see more exclusive content. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, tap the bell, and I will see you folks on the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.